6 a.m. over here.
Do you mean to have your microphone on? Rich? I'm happy to turn it off for you. Goodbye.
Okay, and just for your information, if you're joining us now, Mythico chat is not working with Jabbers, so you can join Jabber directly. And Ecker, no, we're not able to remotely turn your mic on. We can only turn it off. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everybody to the Gendispatch meeting. My name is Francesca Palombini. Pete Resnick is my co-chair, and we're having a 2-hour session today. Next slide. This is a ITF meeting, so the note well applies. By now, I hope that you have all seen and read it. But if you haven't, please take a moment to read it and understand it. Next slide. This session is being recorded, just as a reminder. Yeah, either. It's I only see like
All right. I will switch modes. I was sharing the whole screen, but I'm guessing the Mac doesn't like that very much. Let me just share the file.
to the slides in the chat. If that doesn't work, you can go in and look at the slides.
Does that work
locally.
better so far?
Yep.
Good.
That works. So these are some online meeting tips. But other please help out, especially if you're going to say something at the microphone and you want it reported in the minutes. Otherwise, yes, slides, chairs, email address, list, and charter. Everything is there. And the next slide. This is our agenda for today. We are in the intro about process. Business open mic session, and then we're gonna close the meeting. Just remind you of the And to speak, please first join the queue, and then when you're given the floor, send audio and possibly video if you want. And the chat, which you can find there. And that's it. I think we can go ahead with the first and only agenda item today. Brian.
I assume Pete's putting up the slides.
Yes, slides are being shared.
Slowly. The screen share is being started.
Yes, it takes a second.
It's a very long second. Do you want me to start, or shall we see if the screen share starts anyway? Right. So this is embarrassing. I have to find the slides myself now. Yeah, I have the master copy right here. Okay, so I'm assuming Adrian's in the room as well, but I assume he's okay with me talking to the slides since he's also a co-author. If you're looking at slide 1, it lists a number of authors and the name of the draft and the topic, which is adoption of internet drafts. And the point is that we're updating the existing guidelines. We're not starting this work from zero. So if you could find slide 2, or maybe Pete can even get slide 2 up on the screen. No, screen share is still being started according to Meetecho. So on slide 2, why are we doing this? Why are we bringing this to Gendispatch? Well, several of us noticed, and that's why there's 5 or 6 names on the document, that participants in the ITF sometimes seem to be confused about working group adoption of a draft and how it fits into the standards process. And that's okay, we're often confused, but we have noticed that this quite often seems to lead to misunderstandings or even to conflict. Now, we intentionally don't want to give anecdotes that might lead back to pointing the fingers at particular people or particular working groups, because we don't think that people are at fault here. It's just that there doesn't seem to be enough clarity about the adoption process. And we believe that this can be improved. So the existing RFC on adoption and handling of drafts by ITF working groups, RFC 7221, does offer guidelines in this area, but the experience seems to be from these misunderstandings and conflicts that the guidelines aren't quite clear enough. So that's why we're doing this. A little side note, maybe Adrian would like to speak to this slide since it was his suggestion. No sign from Adrian, so I'll go on. Oh, and the slides are up on Meetecho now as well. That's good. If you could try to go to the next slide, if that works. Well, I'm trying to speak to slide 3, not slide 2.
We'll get our act together sooner or later.
Somebody. Anyway, the point about RFC 7221 is that it sort of went past a bit quietly. The authors just wrote it. They solicited reviews from a few key people, i.e. their friends. They solicited reviews from the working group chairs list. The document was AD sponsored and went through an IETF last call, but in the whole process, there were relatively few community comments, and the comments that there were obviously positive because the document was approved by the IESG and posted, but it's been fairly low profile all the same. And so maybe the time is now for people to have another look at this question and give community comments on what we're proposing by the way of changes, which are clarifications. So the deliverable, which is part of the Gendispatch question, I think, that's slide 4. Let me just look back at Meet Echo and see what's happening. Nothing's happening on Meet Echo. Okay, so we're, oh, there we go. What did you do? You did the right thing.
Magic happened. I just had to get it together. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So the deliverable would be an update to RFC 7221, a replacement, that is, an obsolete, not an update in RFC terminology, that adds some clarifications about the implications of a working group adopting a draft, adds some additional guidelines for the adoption process, and this is a new topic that isn't really in there at the moment, adds some guidelines for the opposite, which you might call unadoption when a working group decides to let a draft go. At the moment, our intention is that there should be no other changes to the RFC, and there is absolutely no change to IETF rules. This is informational. There was an earlier draft which was purporting to be a draft of a BCP, but we decided that was probably not the best way to go, and staying with guidelines is the right way to go.
And we have Adrian in the queue, by the way.
Yep.
Adrian,
So
would you like to speak?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Brian, earlier I'm wrangling 2 working groups at the moment, and somehow I can only speak in one at once. Yeah, just a little history on 7221. It has its roots in a working group chair training session I led way back, like over 25 IETF meetings ago, and then Dave wanted to pull that into an RFC, which was great. Our main objective in 7221 was not to write formal process, so not writing rules, hence informational and guidance.
Exactly. And the intention of this particular draft is not to change that at all, but just to make the guidelines a little bit more robust, I think. So now I have a question for the chairs, because the next 4 slides go into details, and that's normally forbidden in Gendispatch. So do you want me to go into details or skip forward?
So there's Francesca. She can make the call.
Time today, so I'm not as strict as usual about that. So please go ahead.
Well, and
Okay, so
before you do, can I ask one question from the floor, as it were?
of course.
Do you all, as authors, see any harm if we dispatch it BCP-ish as opposed to informational-ish?
I would say personally, from the discussion we had on the first version, which was BCP-ish, that people don't think it actually needs to be legislation, that it's better if we leave the legislation untouched. But so I think it might be harmful because it would be trying to over-regulate. But that's produced 3 hands.
Yeah, so Adrian, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd go slightly further than Brian in my assessment of us not needing rules for this, and wanting to remain slightly more flexible to allow working group chairs to do the right thing rather than be nailed down to a set of rules. But having said that, the guidance is probably useful, especially for working group chairs who are pondering the right way to approach adoption and things like that.
Then let me tighten up my question a little, because I understand where you're going with that. Making it BCP-ish, recommending that to whoever we are dispatching this, that we think this would be a good BCP. It doesn't necessarily have to be more than guidelines in the text, but there's a difference between informational and BCP of the amount of consensus that the IASG would look for to approve it. And do we want to have the IASG push for a BCP level of consensus, or the rule on informationals in the IASG is one AD thinks it's okay, well then it's okay.
So there are two levels of consensus you need to look at there, aren't there? There's the level of consensus across the IETF. My understanding is that informational goes for exactly the same consensus measure as BCP these days. In other words, all informational RFCs are IETF last called. And then there's consensus in the IESG, where you're right in terms of the count of ballots, but not necessarily right in terms of the count of discusses. Right.
And I was just putting it out there. I wanted to get your sense of that so that it sort of pointed the discussion in whatever direction we might be going. So in the queue, I see Ecker.
You that you want to have this conversation. You asked the authors, so if you'd like me to sit back and not talk about this now, I'm happy to finish whatever. So I guess to show my hand initially, I don't think this document should be published. I think it's a mistake to have things that look like they're guidance about how we should behave that are informational and that have normative force. I think that was a mistake with 7282, to be frank. I consistently get this cited to me as if it had some normative force. I'd have to keep saying, no, this is just someone's opinion. So I think the same thing applies here. So I think this document should, I didn't notice this document was really published. I would have objected then too. I also think that there's some actual things in this document I don't agree with, which would make me even less likely to see it wanting to be published, either as BCP or informational. I'm not sure, like, in a sense of attempt to litigate this so it becomes like something everybody can agree on in terms of in terms of the content. Is that a fantastic idea? I mean, our process generally expects the chairs to exercise a very significant amount of discretion about how they run the process, and attempting to nail it down with like more rules as this does, especially with respect to the adoption calls, I think is simply unwise.
So just to echo what Francesca said at the beginning, does that impact how you would dispatch this? You would not dispatch this. You would like to go to Bitbucket or something?
Correct. So, but I will oppose it more aggressively if it's being dispatched to BCP.
Got it. Christian?
To kind of echo what Iker just said, I am concerned with any kind of document that makes rules like that, because it can be used in various kinds of discussions as a cudgel to do something or not, or someone who's discontent about some decision to get buzzed. So first, I mean, I kind of agree that if we do something like that, we shall not do a pseudo standard. It should be something which has the rule of the law, and it is what the IETF agrees, or it is not published. I don't believe that we should do an informational or anything like that. And second, I am a bit worried about what the constituency is to review and progress this document before it goes to the publication and the last call. I am worried that the natural constituency are the people with experience as working group chairs and or ADs. But only a fraction of those will be represented here. And I wonder whether we have the right process to get sufficient input there to decide what Iker suggested, to either not publish it or to publish it as a full standard, a full BCP. I wonder whether we have the right constituency to review that before it goes to last call, or whether we're setting up for kind of a rushed last call with lots of discussion.
Can I just respond directly to that, out of order? Firstly, I think to some extent that's exactly what happened with 7221. I must admit, I don't remember any discussion of it at the time. It was a little bit of a surprise to me. But secondly, there is another constituency which you didn't mention. It's the participants, document authors, who feel sometimes hard done by the adoption process, or simply don't understand it, or assume that adoption means the working group will approve their document as an RFC. So the constituency is actually wider than just the working group chairs, even though the working
I
group
agree with
chairs are
that.
the ones. Yeah. So I wouldn't diminish the problem you're raising and how to discuss it, but I think there is a real problem.
Yeah, and that means that in my mind, this group should identify the review process and the discussion process before it decides to progress this document.
Mhm.
Clear, we can't progress the document. We can only dispatch it to somewhere else. So the question you're specifically asking is, what method are we going to recommend to use to dispatch this?
Yes.
Mhm.
And as Brian just said, I mean, these things are better if they have a wide kind of discussion before we go into last call, and they should certainly not go into some kind of a fast track process or whatever.
They they recommended, or they hoped outcome of this meeting.
I wanted to say, as a working group chair, that there's two things I look for in a document like this, one of which is guidance in how to behave. The other thing is cover.
Ron, I can barely hear you. It sounds like...
I'm sorry, I didn't click my microphone on. I was going to say, as a working group chair, there are two things I look for in a document like this, one of which is guidance in how to behave, and the other thing is cover in the case of an appeal, where I can point to a process and say, I followed this process, the process is reasonable, and my behavior within that process was reasonable. What I don't want is to have full authority to do everything and then have to justify my behavior in an appeal as compared to every other chair in the IATF, and say, yes, I am behaving within the reasonable norms of the organization, which aren't written down and which you should have understood, you person who hasn't been around for 30 years and doesn't know everything. It's much better to have clear rules and clear guardrails around what is and isn't acceptable behavior than just to say everyone has full power when they're a chair and everyone will be reasonable. So I do support something along these lines, whether it's this document or not, and I support it being a BCP, not informational.
Okay, Michael.
So as one of the authors, one of the things that inspired me to get involved in this was because I saw what I thought was silly wastes of time in working groups where there clearly was a document that should be adopted, or in some cases, a working group doc and an individual draft going on for 2 or 3 years from a design team that the working group chairs created. And I'm like, well, why isn't it a working group document already? What was the point? I mean, the whole distinction is, can we spend working group time on the document at the beginning or the end of the session? And so I really did. It was sort of this dogmatic, we have to adopt it and blah 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 blah, and it's not ready for adoption kind of thing. And we had some conversations last time about documents that are essentially too mature to the working group. And so what I saw was that there's this adherence to this what effect people thought was this rule, and it's not a rule. And so what I really want to say is to somehow make it clear to everyone, this is not a rule. This is just one of the many processes you can follow. And so I'm really sensitive to, I think Eckert and several other people said that, you know, maybe we don't need any more stuff, and I don't want to write more rules. And I'm also very sensitive to Braun, who actually, and this makes a very good point, that he'd like to be able to say, I followed the process, this is the process. So a question that I would have for the subsequent speakers and the other ones who have already spoken, particularly Eckert, was, do you think that we should have any change any of the rules about how we adopt documents? Should we make it more clear? Or are you happy with the, like, should we make the current practice actually a rule, or should we do something else, or is there just no problem?
Okay. Mark or Brian, do you want to answer? Sorry, do you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think the question should be on the table as Michael phrased it.
And we can't hear you for some reason. You're not sending audio, that's why. Okay.
Better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I think some good points have been made all around. Kind of phrasing this in terms of how it should be dispatched to try and help the chairs along. I see three options. And one is, I think, to try and make it a BCP. And if we want to do that, I think there are some real hurdles to be overcome. It needs scrutiny. It needs broad review. You'll need a working group to spin up. And the problem that I see is that these process-oriented groups tend to attract a certain crowd. And the folks who it's going to affect, and I think this could be quite impactful, it's going to affect the day-to-day of a lot of people and a lot of working groups. And so to get their attention and their review and their buy-in on it is going to be an issue, I think. You know, just flipping what is currently guidance over to a normative, you know, a BCP is a pretty big move, and I think it deserves a lot of scrutiny if we're going to do that. So I'm not necessarily against that, but I do wonder if we have the energy and the focus and the attention of the people who are necessary to make that actually happen. This is like revising 2026, and it should be treated like that. The second option, I think, would be to republish as informational with a few improvements, which I paged through the slides real quick. It seems like these are relatively minor clarifications. So improve the document a bit, but you slap a big disclaimer at the front of it that says this is not, you know, a rule. These are just guidelines. This is advice. You can opt into this, much like we have the advice on how you can opt into how you use Git for working groups. It's not required of all working groups. And then the third option is to do nothing, which Eckert seemed to advocate. I don't have a firm preference amongst the three, but if we're going to actually make this a BCP or something like that, I would like to see a lot more detail about how we're going to come to that agreement and how it's going to get shopped around the IETF to make sure that, you know, RFC 7221 just doesn't get adopted by default because it's already there. That wouldn't be right.
Thank you. I'm just going to cut the queue at Eckert.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, cool,
Yes.
thanks. So I'm having a hard time understanding what the purpose of this document as an RFC is. So I think there's definitely value in writing down how we operate. And that doesn't mean that it needs to land in an RFC. So, you know, if we go back 30 years, everything that we did at the IETF landed in an RFC because that's kind of the only way we could communicate. And I say I wasn't there back then, but that's my understanding. If you look at RFC 1121, it's a collection of poems which are really cute, but it doesn't make sense as an RFC. There's no reason whatsoever. Another example is the Tao of the IETF, which is very important in my mind and was a collection of RFCs until we one day woke up and realized, oh, we have a website, we can put it on the web. And anyway, all I'm trying to say is I think the content of this document is valuable, and thanks, Brian, for doing this work, but I don't think it needs to be an RFC. Unless what you're trying to do is coerce chairs and force them to do something. So if, for example, the goal here is that we find that there are chairs that are misbehaving and we want to make the rules crystal clear, then we make a standards track RFC or a BCP. And that has, force of law to some extent, where if the chair doesn't follow these rules, the AD has a very clear path for firing them or telling them to behave. But in this case, if all we're trying to do is give advice, which I think is helpful, why not just put it on IETF.org? I think this would be actually more helpful, because the problem with RFCs is, and that's not specific to this draft, people don't understand that we have multiple tracks. And that's a problem outside of the IETF, it's a problem inside the IETF. People don't go and check that this is informational or BCP. And many times I've had people cite informational RFCs as the rule of law to me, because they don't understand that. And I'm worried that, to echo what some of the previous folks in the queue were saying, an informational doc carries these kind of problems, because then people treat it as law. So in terms of dispatching here, what I would personally really prefer is to see this text turned into a web page that we can then reference to give chairs a hand. But that makes it less look like a rule of law. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And also checking Jabber, and I see Michael saying dispatch to edu team, website team. I can live with that, and maybe Greg will want to.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thanks to the authors for doing the update. And I want to stress the word update, because it seems some of the people who have spoken have forgotten that there already is a document in existence. I'm glad that Ecker acknowledged that as he began his comments, but we have a document already. That's issue number 1. And so the question is, we'd like the guidance in the document to be as good as it can be. Issue number 2 is that I believe a number of the people who actually read the document, or who actually commented on the document, didn't read the document. Because right in the front of the document, it says, this is non-normative advice. Right there, it says it in big letters. And so I would suggest 2 things. First of all, that people read the document. Second, we have a natural constituency where this document can get very, very good review. And that is the working group chairs list. Right? That is an excellent place to bring this document for review, get lots and lots of comments, and even have somebody monitor that those comments, and maybe then determine whether there are outstanding issues based on those comments. So I would like to see the document updated with the best advice. I'm not sure I agree with absolutely every word in the document, but that's okay, because it's non-normative. Why? It says so. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Elliot. And I believe that some people in the queue were answering Pete, who asked about should this be BCP and
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Yeah. So I think this should be dispatched. I'm a little continue to be confused about this working group, about what it means to dispatch something. I think many of these questions that are being discussed would get resolved where after it's dispatched, not before, because as people have said, we're not exactly all the right audience. But I think this is useful in the working group I chair, and I've noticed this in other working groups. There seems to be confusion about the difference between adopting something to work on versus advancing it, and a lot of times the criteria for adoption starts to look exactly like the criteria for advancement, and I think it would be good to have a set of guidelines that make that clearer, because it's an operational problem in how working groups work. So I would like to see this adopted or dispatched so it could actually be worked on and then published in some form.
Thanks, Bob. And Kristen, but we can resume conversation at the end of the presentation.
I guess several points. So Elliot, I was aware of the text that said it was non-normative. My experience is people do not read that kind of text. And I will note 7282 also has similar text, and yet I repeatedly hear it cited to me as if it were somehow an IETF rule. So I think, perhaps a little less assumption that people aren't reading it just because they disagree with you with the content of that text or the impact of that text. Second, I think, there was sort of a more abstract question asked of, do we think there's ambiguity about working group procedure? And I think there actually is. I occasionally read 2014 for things, and I find that things that I thought were like the thought were general practice do not appear to be like general practice. I suspect the fix for that, however, is to revise 2014. Not to revise, not to have a commentary which sort of then confuses the issue even further. I guess I would be on board perhaps for a light revision 2018, but I think that sort of a commentary document doesn't help, and I think that having that be a BCP seems even worse, because now we have two documents which have to be reconciled. If we think what we're trying to do is change is like have something have normative force that working your practice, we have such a document. It's called 2014. We need 2014 this.
And Brian, I think you can go ahead and get through the slides, and then we resume conversation.
We'll resume it quite quickly, I think, because I don't want to go into the details after that conversation. I think it would be a little bit irrelevant. Could you go to slide 5, Pete, if you can still find the right button? Right. So this is just a note for people to see that we have put up a draft, which is the 00 draft, which is basically the RFC text as before. And then we put up a draft 01 about 10 minutes later, which has the proposed updates. So if you look at the RFC diff between those two, you see exactly what we're proposing in precise detail. And this being 2020, there is, of course, a GitHub repository where you can find the cram down if you want. And you could even try these pull request things, though I don't know if any of us have the competence to handle them. We'll find out. Then there are 4 slides summarizing the changes, and I really don't think it would be productive to discuss those given the discussion we just had. So I'd ask you to just zoom through. Right, there we go, last slide. That's the discussion we were just having. Shall we continue? Because, I don't know, because it seems to me that setting up a working group for this would be out of proportion, but we can't have it as a little closed group discussion where only a few people who are interested to talk about it. So we need something. If we're going to do this work at all, we need something, perhaps an ad hoc mailing list. That's about all I've got to say. Maybe one of my co-authors would like to add something.
Before.
I've been listening, and I'm not convinced that we should have this kind of partial updates like that. I am definitely not convinced by Elliot's argument that this is informational, so you can say what you want. That's not true. And Ika is right on that. And I mean, if what we want is tighten the process, then we should tighten the process, but we should do that as a process revision. That's pretty much what I believe.
That's not actually what I personally want. I can't speak for the co-authors. I want to get rid of some misunderstandings. And what I've seen personally is people who are relatively new to the IDF process, like, they've only arrived in the last 10 years. They've seen, by example, some very formalized adoption processes in certain working groups with very, very long discussions, which certainly wasn't how things were 20 years ago. And they really do believe it's part of the process. And you tell them, no, it's not in the BCP. The chairs have decided to do it this way, but it could have been done another way. So that there really is misunderstanding. I'm actually quite attracted by the idea of putting all this sort of material on a website on the website rather than in formal documents, just like we did with the DAO. But we don't think somewhere that misunderstandings will continue. That's my prediction.
I think I agree with you on the idea of putting that at some level like the Tao. And in this case, it's clear it's something which is descriptive and not normative. And that would be interesting.
Yep.
Mark.
Click both buttons, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, Brian, I wanted to ask a question based on what you just said. Some working groups might use a more formal or elaborate adoption process for good reasons. They might want to make sure that they get buy-in from implementers. They might have too many drafts coming at them at one time, and they need to narrow down the field. Are you saying that that's not legitimate and you want to give people ammunition to fight back against it? Or is it just that you don't want people to think that's the only way?
The second one.
Okay.
And, you do understand, don't you, that most people who participate in the ITF aren't on the ITF mailing list, right? They aren't even on the announced list. They just show up for a working group and they see what happens and they make deductions from that about what the process is. So, we have a problem. And where do those people look? They probably look on the website, actually. They don't look in RFCs.
So I agree with that. And I think, my experience in HTTP and Quick and other working groups I've been involved in helping to set up, we try and create a website where all this material is close to hand and people can understand the process using the working group really intuitively. And we refine that a lot over time. And if the ITF were to have materials that were equally accessible, I think that would be a good thing. But that draws back us back to the discussion of, is the appropriate output for this an RFC or something else, and what would that be? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a valid question.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Pete from the floor.
Mute.
Yes, there, I'm sending audio. I will put this in the form of a question to not do undue influence with my hat, which I swear I've taken off. If the problem you're identifying is that people, even with what we've currently got in 2418 and 7221, believe that there is some sort of rule that they have to follow and that the chairs aren't doing it right, or chairs think they have to follow some set of rules, are you suggesting that maybe we do need BCP text which says there is no rule? That this is under chair discretion and make it explicit that it's under chair discretion?
Yeah, I would say that's a direct implication of RFC 2418 actually already, but sometimes you have to say things. I wouldn't
Twice.
disagree with Eka that, you know, if anybody's got the energy to go and revise 2418, you know, that would probably be a wonderful thing to do, but it won't be me. I don't have that much energy. Right? And when they're finished, they can do 2026 as well.
I'm hoping to retire long before that happens.
So yeah, I think it cuts both ways. And there are cases where individual authors have been angry with working group chairs because they haven't been prepared to start an adoption process for a draft. And that's the other side of the rule. So, you know, we don't like it when people have misunderstandings that lead them to be angry.
All right. Thank you.
Andrew, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. For clarity, I'm not, and never have been, and highly unlikely ever to be a working group chair. So I'm simply observing from the document and the conversation. I mean, to the point of putting some text on a website, whether that's a good idea is for others to decide. But I would recommend that the text needs some scrutiny first. And therefore, it doesn't seem to me to sort of address the question, which is what to do with the text before the point where it goes to a website. And I think from the chat, it would seem to be a good idea to at least give clarity to working group chairs as to what the rules are or indeed are not. And if it's up to their discretion, maybe some indication of what the boundaries of that discretion might be. So I think for the purposes of transparency, publishing a document seems like a good thing. If that's then added to a website afterwards, fantastic. But it would seem useful to actually go through the normal ITF process first, and then decide whether, for purposes of publicity, pushing the material somewhere else as well would also be beneficial. But I guess I'm leaning towards something like a BCP would feel like a good idea, but others will have different views to that, clearly.
Thank you, Andrew. Since there are no more people in the queue for now. Oh, go ahead, Rudiger.
You shouldn't have said that, Francisco.
Hi. The suggestions for distributing information, some being already out there in RFCs and some going elsewhere, and having overlapping topics, and potentially some of the information in the not so official places trying to fix RFCs is likely to create confusion in people about precedence of the various sources of information, aside from the question whether people who know that the RFC repository is the official information of the of the IETF might even find the other places, and making guesses about a large, diverse crowd and their behavior, where the crowd may actually not be that much involved in the overall processes. Well, okay, beware of that kind of making guesses.
Thank you. Robert?
So thank you for bringing this update. just some comments as somebody who's actually relatively new to the IETF process, despite now being an AD. And I have to say that the way that IETF documents its process is actually quite opaque to people that are new to IETF. It's quite hard to find out what sort of things you're meant to do and where that's documented. There's a long list of RFC numbers and updates those RFCs. And for the people who know the process well, I think that makes it very easy. But I think for the newer generation of people coming into the IETF, it's very hard to know what the rules are, what the guidance is, how these things work. And the only way you can actually find out about this stuff is to sort of follow what the working groups are doing and to pick it up as you go along. And so I do get, I agree with sort of Brian that I think the people coming into IETF now will probably pick up different views of those rules based on the working groups that they participate in, and they won't be able to separate between what they're experiencing and what the hard and fast rules are. So I definitely think there's something to be done here about trying to explain the process in a way that's easier to newcomers, and I quite like the idea of that going onto a web page. And of course, having that information on the web page makes it potentially easier to update, and it potentially also makes it easier to reference other RFCs and point out where these bits of information are and should be. So I think that's a good thing. I do have a concern about there being almost like two sets of rules, the hard and fast rules, and this information is guidance. And hence that is a concern, and I have a concern where people may use this guidance with more force than it's meant to have, both from working group chairs trying to stop new work coming in because they don't agree with it, and vice versa, where participants are using it to keep bashing the working group chairs to adopt something where there actually isn't consensus around that. So I do see that there's problems there, but I think anything that we can do to make it easier for newcomers to the IETF to understand the process and navigate it, I think that's a good thing. So I haven't really expressed how this work should be done or where it should be done. I think continuing on a list is a good idea. Discussing this in the working group chairs list also seems a good way of getting extra feedback. So I like that idea. I don't know about the other choices. No, that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Rudiger?
To add to the question where to place information, I certainly can see a point in putting on the web. We actually have a chapter on the IETF.org talking about how we work. Putting there educational tutorial guidance information that points to in an explaining way where to from which of the RFCs to pull which information and how they relate. But again, kind of avoid creating confusion about precedents of various information sources. And by the way, the How We Work chapter of the web, the last time I was looking there, did not look that convincing and well done to me, but it's actually some time ago that I last looked. Thank you.
Thank you. Oliver, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I have to second Rudiger's comments. I believe moving or having these information in two different places is a recipe for disaster. I know that the documents in IETF, at least for me, sometimes are a little bit confusing to read, especially with all the updates and replacements and so forth. But I think that is something, if we start moving data into a website on one part and having them in the documents on the other side, really gets the danger that if I focus on the data tracker, for example, then I might miss something what is on the website and vice versa. I think the right track to do would be more having a more simplistic index that basically is on the website, is updated, and refers me to the RFCs that are important for the particular portions. And if in the argument, maybe what I tried to say before, the argument that the RFCs are so difficult and therefore we should have it maybe better on the website, at least that's how I understood it, doesn't really count for me, because if this is the big problem, then standards draft in general have a big problem. From my own experience now participating in the IETF, I think since IETF 86 or something like this, there is a steep learning curve. And when I have new colleagues who want to learn about the IETF, there is a steep learning curve, and it is not easy to explain everything. But I think the IETF is not the only organization that has a steep learning curve. And it's fine. After a while, you get in. I mean, it's with everything in life. Trying to have stuff on a website rather than the documents, I think, as Rüdiger said before, gives the danger that I have now multiple different locations where I find information, and I pretty much will miss the stuff that I should not have missed. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. What's the question for you, Oliver? I'm trying to follow the chat as well, and someone has or whatever it is, have that document the website or training.
Yes, of course. That's what I mean. If we have, I think maybe what is missing is if I go to the IETF website, it is sometimes very hard to find things. So I think that is more the issue, that one should have maybe a better index where I can find the information and they reference back into the RFCs, BCPs, informational drafts, whatever form the particular document will have. But keeping it. Yeah, sorry. No. Go ahead.
I believe people are Greg or Alyssa.
I mean, maybe if I can add one more thing. I know that the newcomers RFCs, the newcomers events are always very good, or at least back then when I participated in some of them, that explain how the IETF works. It might not be bad to have like refresher courses or refresher meetings, because things change. And I don't always go back and read how everything has to be done. And after a while, you get set into your mechanisms. So having something that draws in even people who are already more mature in the IETF and know how things work, to have more a broader area with refresher stuff, what changed, how things go, that might be maybe helpful as well. And
yeah, and I believe this is kind of outside the the scope of this
Yeah.
this presentation, but I really agree with your point. So happy that you brought it up, and I know there are.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, hi. So I had one point. I'll make two based on Pete's last question. A number of people have said that just because a document says that it's non-normative, people will read past it and use the document to bash process. And so my one question is, has that previously happened with 7221? Because if it hasn't, maybe it's the way in which documents like 7282 were written versus how 7221 was written. And if it's clear enough that this is guidance and not normative, maybe that's okay. And the second point I was going to make in answer to Pete's question is, I'm concerned that we have some gentlemen here who put in some time to just update some existing work. The scope that we're now discussing, and the question that Pete just asked, is incredibly broad. And what I would be concerned is that we kick off something along the lines of a very large process, stalling what was supposed to be a relatively small update, and yet not have the stomach to actually complete the very large process. That's happened before. And even when we had the stomach, sometimes things just went awry. So I'm a little nervous about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elliot. So, Pete, you can join me. I see Brian has stopped the video as well. I am kind of disagreeing with what, like I about making like right. And then when the discussion continued, I that being on the
Yeah. It's I'm right. Go ahead, Ecker, if you want to clarify. But okay. I mean, I think we got the message that actually some people think that informational is almost worse than BCP. That I mean, Ecker said, updating 2418 to be clearer about what roles what latitude the chairs have might even be a more appropriate thing to do. Christian, do you want to add to that? Christian, you have to turn on your microphone.
Just turn themselves on because they find that you want to speak. It's terrible. I think I disagree with Elliot's point that providing guidance and marking it informational is okay. Okay, either I think the documents can be either descriptive, as in we are seeing working group share facing this problem, and some have been doing this and some have been doing that, etc. And you may add everything is okay. But that's one thing. If you describe that the way it is in the draft, as in, hey, you should be doing either this or that or that, that's not just guidance. It's kind of normative. That's clear. And I think I'm with Iker there. I mean, it's either you make it clearly descriptive and it doesn't try to make rules, it just clarifies what you see on there, or you make it a BCP. But the in-between is bad.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Okay, so let's start from what we can agree on, and AD sponsored. I do believe there was agreement about training. There should be more training or more better way to. But I don't know how it.
Yeah, go ahead, Alyssa.
Well, so maybe that's just one thing to take off the table then. I was just trying to narrow the decision set. So it would be useful to know if anyone is against updating the website / wiki documentation or incorporating that updated information into future training. Because if people are against that, then we won't do it. If a lot of people are against it. So maybe that's like just one step. And then for some people, that sounds like that's maybe sufficient. And for other people, it's not. So it could be a way to serialize the questions for this group.
Right, because there is something, if we get that information out on a website by way of clarification of 7221, then I think we have a launching point for, okay, what should we do by way of process for this? Do we need a document that points to this? Do we need a BCP that says something that updates 2418 that clarifies what that web page is about? And I understand Andrew made the comment that we've got 7221 now in the document series. So there does seem to be some reason to do something to change the state, given that 7221 is around and people agree that it needs changing. But maybe doing the web page first and then figuring out what to do with the document series is the right order of steps. Does
Yeah, and that's, I mean, also why I posted the link to the chair resources, because you can see on that page, it combines, it's a collection of many different things, right? It's like, there's some RFCs linked there, there's ISG statements, there's other web pages, there's the link to the wiki. So that's just the state of our process, is like different things are captured in different formats. We're not gonna be able to fix that with this one update. But yeah, I think the process that you outlined might help people to get clarity on what's needed here.
So I guess then let's put it in the other form. Are there folks in the room who object to the idea of getting this information together on the website or in a wiki or whatever we decide that appropriate place is first, and then going on to the question of how to either obsolete 7221 or update 2418 or what have you? Is everybody okay with that as a plan going forward? Andrew first.
All right, yeah, just to that point, just echoing what I put on the chat, it seems to me it would be odd to update the website before updating the document. If we can agree what needs to go on a website, surely we can agree that we ought to put that text in the document first. It would seem just odd to do it. Yeah, that feels the wrong way around, to put it on a website and not sort out the document, because if there's a contradiction between the website and RFC 7221, I would hope that's equally unhelpful. So sort out the documentation first, then other stuff like website training, etc., would be my suggestion.
Okay. Henrik?
Yes, exactly the same point. If you want to publish something, we should publish it rather than having a website with a pseudo-published instruction or information which we can't really agree to put in a document. It's the wrong way around. Agree on the document, then update the website. We have a primary publication path, so use that, then derive website information from that.
So we don't have agreement on anything, except that we need more clarity. But where to go to clarify, or where to even start from?
Yeah, and I'm watching Mark's comments go by. I think one of the concerns being expressed is if we put it on the website, update the advice we're giving, but only put it on the website, then 7221, which is the current advice, does that preempt the website in some particular way? I presume the answer there is we can make the website explicit that this update 7221, and this is clarifying things. So, but that's not Mark's point. So maybe Mark, you want to get to the mic and say what your point is. Go ahead.
My point is that the question of which has precedence, the website or the RFC, assumes that the RFC has any status at all right now. It's informational, and I've heard a lot of dispute about how much weight it carries. So I think presuming that it has some greater weight than the website isn't something that we have everyone bought into yet.
Yeah. And I will say the reason I am being hesitant here you know, Ecker's comment notwithstanding, even going by what is said in 7282, I don't have a clear idea that we've really overcome objections in either direction. So I'm still not clear on what everybody is, if everybody's on the same page. Miria, you want to try and help?
Yeah, not sure how much I can help, but I think we should actually try to figure out what the problem is and fix that. And if the problem is that people don't have this information, we need to find a way to provide this information to them. So I think this is more about training and more about figuring out where you know, what's the place where people can actually find it. That's the important bit. I don't think that our rules are not clear in the sense that we actually try to keep our rules in some sense also loose and give chairs some kind of slack to handle the process as they need it, right? So I think the problem we have is really providing the right information to the right people.
The two way to solve this and then the other opinion is no, it doesn't have to be an RFC because a way to it, you fit the same way by just putting that information on a website. Two opinions I'm hearing, and I hope
So yeah, Alyssa just said what I was about to head toward, which is some what can you live with questions. So to the folks who don't want to see yet another informational document, which 7221 already is, are you in a state of we can't live with 7221 being updated informational, and then we go and figure out the state of web pages and trainings and blah, 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 blah. So, Ecker, what can't you live with?
Well, I just think this is the wrong question. Like, you know, these, like, we do these can you live with things, and we have ties in a working group, and we need to, like, decide whether, like, the bit should be 1 or 2. But, like, here what we have is we have a proposed piece of work, which obviously doesn't have, like, I think, any kind of consensus to move forward, and it's not our job to, like, sort out somewhere to move forward. It can just die. And so, like, the idea that, like, we have to have, like, so, like, I don't think we need to result like Ted Hardy-ish, you know, like, tie-breaking stuff. It could just die.
But Ecker, look, here's the question. We've got a bunch of people who agree that 7221, as it stands, needs clarification, right?
Okay, I didn't agree with that, by the way, in case you thought I did.
I understand, but I think you're actually in the rough on that one. I mean, there is a significant number of people who think that this document updates 7221 in useful ways, and they're just quibbling about, well, should we put it on a website? Should we clarify it in line? Should we make a BCP? Given the state of 7221 being not acceptable to a bunch of people, what is the right thing to do? That's the question I'm wrestling with.
I'm just trying to figure out if you're asking me what my opinion is, or if you're just.
Yes, I'm absolutely asking for your opinion. I'm looking for opinions on how to get through this.
Well, I am fine with the website thing. But I just think that I just think that the way of phrasing it, like, this has to come to some consensus of way forward, is just not like the way to think about this problem. So that's what I was objecting to. But in terms of substantive things, I'm fine with the website thing.
Oh, okay. And Robert, you had something to add?
So I think that if 7221 has got issues and needs to be fixed, then either we fix it or we somehow mark it as obsolete. But I think having a document that's sitting around that doesn't necessarily reflect best practice or what the current views of how they should look like is the cause confusion. So I think that the first step should be trying to fix 7221, if that's the right number, and I think that should just be done as an informational update, and that shouldn't be that hard to do necessarily. It's a small number of updates, and then from that, then take that and work on the websites. I sort of also view some of this as a bit like the discussions about living RFCs, and really the IETF process, rather than being documented through a set of RFCs at one point in time, I see the website as acting more like a living document that serves that specifies this is currently what we regard the process as being, and referencing back to the RFCs or the bits of the RFCs that people need to read. I was looking at that website, that guidance one for participants, and it does reference a lot of RFCs. And as in someone who's coming into the IETF and trying to figure out what they need to know and what they can ignore, has an awful lot of stuff to try and look through. It's still really hard.
And Ecker, you're unmuted. Did you want to say something additional, or did you just not mute yourself?
I'm just apparently incompetent at pushing the button.
Okay, no problem. I'll mute you just for the sake of muting you. All right.
Try these questions then. If no one else wants to come to mic.
Go for it.
Okay. Oh, wow. The chat goes so fast. It's hard to go.
So the problem what I see here is that maybe what is not completely clear to me and what would be good to be understood. So we talk right now about RFC versus website. And let's put out everything quickly on the website, and then we work on the RFC. Why quickly? If the RFC is delayed because there are disputes, there are different opinions, then the same disputes and same different opinions would also be for the content that goes on the website. So I think it is a dangerous step to put stuff on a website, just put them out there, and that then later on will be followed up by an RFC. It looks a little bit like, I want to create a new plan. Not everybody's on board yet. So I just throw it out on the website and say, hey, that's what we will do. And I have it out long enough, so eventually everybody said, yeah, but that's what is written on the website. So we have to put this also in the RFC. I think that's a dangerous precedent what we start here. The RFC has a clear process. People can discuss, people can bring their concerns, and then eventually it gets ratified and it becomes an RFC, informational BCP, I don't care at this point. But there's a process. Once we have that, if the RFC is too complicated and you want to put a more simplistic explanation of the RFC, be my guest, put this on the website. But I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent to first start publishing something before you really know what will be in the document.
Alisa, go ahead.
I think the point that was made earlier is that the force of things on the website is much less. And so if what we're trying to do is just provide some guidance to people that isn't to be used as a stick to beat them with, that's where people see the value in publishing information on the website. So like whether or not it ends up updating some RFC it doesn't have to, prolong these discussions in the working group when it gets to be the time where people say, no, 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 the RFC says this, we're not allowed to adopt this document. And then other people, dispute that and you have the whole discussion. It's just like, this is some guidance that can help people understand things like, Braun was saying earlier about, the length of the adoption call and this kind of thing. So I think that's where people are seeing the value of being able to publish things outside of the consensus process. And I would also just say that we have, in the period since the DAO was last published as an RFC, we had hundreds of new people come into the IETF. And it would be, I think, a real shame that we can't, over an 8-year period, we can't update the guidance that we give to new people because we can't get it into an RFC. Like that seems like a really poor experience for new people coming in. And I think the same is true for working group chairs, that, things change, they evolve over time. We make little tweaks here and there, and it's nice to be able to give new people a current understanding of the norms of the IETF without having to go through a 2 or 4 or 8-year cycle to update an RFC every single time.
Oliver?
The right path would be to link the data tracker of the document on the website. And with this, the website basically has the latest information. Everybody sees what the discussions are, what the proposed changes are. If they agree, if they have comments to that, they can chime in. And the danger that the website would be out of sync with the data tracker is eliminated.
I don't know if that was directed towards me, but that's not responsive to what I said. So.
It was in general.
Concerned that instructions for the tools team to make new tools might be out of scope for what we can dispatch to, although who knows.
Okay, should we try the questions?
I don't know that we're going to hear anything different by, we've heard what the objections to moving forward with this are. We've heard what the support for moving forward with it. I'm not inclined to force it. I think the only thing I'm wondering is if we do go forward with an RFC to replace 7221, is there some amount of text that could be put into that RFC that would remove some of the concerns that people have with an informational being taken too normatively? Rudiger, do you have a comment on that?
I can't hear you. I don't know if you're speaking.
Your audio is showing as on, but we're not hearing you.
Maybe muted locally.
Well, we'll get back to you, Rudiger. You may want to push the reconnect audio in the lower right and see if it resets things for you.
In the chat is people I don't think this overrides the RFC. And if it doesn't override what Hendrik said, if it doesn't override, it doesn't need to be published. So maybe that's a question to the authors. Does it override or does it only?
Brian hopped off. Michael, do you want to take a stab?
Wow, I can't believe we've had this conversation. Just I don't envy any note takers or whatever. But I think that's part of my overwhelming. I don't even know how to absorb all of the comments. It seems to me that something like anything that involves needs to go on the website. Absolutely, there's no question we have to put something on a website and improve the training. I think the question comes back to if it seems like 7221 has been ignored and hasn't caused any great disasters. And we could, for instance, the ISG or could just mark it as historic. I think it's informational. I don't know if we can do that. And just leave it all on the website and we could, update the website. To me, that would not be a terrible outcome. Maybe we don't need to do anything about 7221. And I don't know, there's so many comments that I couldn't really form a thing at the end.
Welcome to our world, Michael. I honestly see more people, if we're going with just, numbers, which I know we don't do that, but I hear more people in favor of updating 72. We don't want to split, or yeah, one of the reason is
You reading the Jabber chat? Yeah, I mean, I'm a little reluctant at this point to declare Ecker and Christian's comments as completely in the rough. And we've got to take this to the list anyway. We don't, end the dispatch discussion here. But I think this is going to be an unpleasant summary for the chairs to do to get people to focus in on what the choices are. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see it's not only Christian and Ecker. I see Mark.
Absolutely.
Just want to say that we are reading your comments and we are. If you have form and be clear about, please come to the mic and go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. I was going to do one small thing and make Pete's job easier, not declaring them in the rough, because I pretty much agree with what Mark and Christian and Ecker have been saying. And also one thing to add to that is it was mentioned about communities for whom these kind of updates are intended. And if we are trying to grow the IETF participation and membership, the first place people aren't going to look is for a document list. They're going to look on the website and then look at this convenient section that says how we work. And if that points to a bunch of documents that, originally were formatted in 72 lines per page line printer, and now at least look better on the web, that'll help a little bit, but it's not where the growth of the IETF is going to be. People who want to grow the IETF, it's not where they're going to look. So yeah, I think it's a hard thing to decide, and the fact that the TAO is still an RFC as opposed to being marked obsolete is a problem.
to say it, but I think this is now in our hands, Francesca, to summarize what we've heard here, try and make some coherent questions to the list, and figure out how we get this dispatched. It's been an interesting conversation. Lorenzo, do you want to give us some guidance? You have to unmute yourself, Lorenzo. It's the one with the microphone.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I mean, like, there's so many things wrong with this, right? Like, we operate on RFCs, and yet we can't write an RFC that says how we're supposed to operate. I mean, that's just, to me, like, just blows my mind, right? And we've spent, I think, definitely the better part of an hour in this discussion saying why we should introduce a new way of publishing information that's already written down. And, like, the best possible outcome of this is that we will create confusion between two presumably authoritative sources. We're saying that we can't have people read RFCs. We want them to learn how to write RFCs, but we can't get them to read RFCs because they're hard. I just like, and whatever we do, we're going to have a document that's sitting there in limbo, which used to be authoritative guidance, which we can't do anything with. I really am wondering, like, given that we've had a lot of time to think about this, is it really the case that there are still people that are, strongly objecting, and that their objection actually still technically valid? I mean, like, I really, don't want to reopen the discussion, but, like, we can update RFCs, really? Like, we don't think IETF participants can read RFCs, really? I mean, if we had just updated this RFC, I'm not saying we would be done by now, but, like, why have this discussion? Sorry. He said adding the discussion, so I'll shut up now.
No, I think that was a good point. And yes, I agree with Dave Lawrence in the chat. This is shockingly hard. I didn't expect that to be this.
I'm quite impressed with how good we are at process wonkery and how bad we are at moving on and doing stuff. How keen everyone is to maintain chairs' total freedom to do whatever they want, which I think is the main objection to making a BCP that has normative text that says these are the rules that chairs follow, and these are the constraints on chairs. And I think there's some real value in actually having advice that is stronger than guidelines, parlay, and you can choose to follow it or choose not to follow it. I do think we're wasting our time here if we are trying to do something that is a middle ground that has no strong meaning, and we should just put some guidelines. If guidelines are all we need, then guidelines on a website that we update based on ongoing stuff and that don't need to be an RFC is fine. If we're going to do an RFC, I'm just reading the text there. That's not what's proposed by this draft. Yes, which I think is why this draft's having so much difficulty, because it's proposing something that doesn't gain anything. And so we're going into process wonkery. Anyway, I think there's some value in doing some calls in this meeting for, is there stuff that people can't live with out of the options, to see if there are people who can't live with them, because at the moment we have a bunch of options. Everyone's like, well, that's not my preferred option. And sorry, I'm doing exactly the condescending stuff I was complaining about other people doing in this call. I'm going to stop now.
Rich?
Yeah, Lorenzo's, sorry, in my view, I say some weird noise. Lorenzo's point is wrong, because there's a world of difference between writing a technical. Okay.
Pete, I think we can't hear you. Some weird noises, as Rich said. Then Rich left, so maybe it sounds like Dolphin. Yes. Maybe try to reconnect, Pete. Connect audio.
Try to speak at Ecker speed to get my point out. There's a world of difference between writing a technical document that says how the bits go on the wire and what the semantics of those bits are, and writing a technical document that tries to describe human behavior. And therefore, I don't think it's at all surprising that this is, what was it, spectacularly hard, was the phrase used in the chat room. So, you know, it's an RFC about process, and process about the way humans are supposed to behave is really, really hard to write.
It was shockingly hard, and I'm seeing things in the chat. People are being surprised that this is taking so long and it's being this, and I am also. I didn't expect this to be controversial, but I do think that the conversation that is happening is very useful, and that this controversy would happen with or without this discussion. So I hope that this is actually useful, and that people don't feel like this is a waste of time. And yes, I'm having a hard time the controversy and this being split. I don't hear a clear I don't know if we want to try the questions just to the list. Pete, have you managed to reconnect audio?
Let's see. Does that sound like not some squeaky thing?
Not like a dolphin, no.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. Yeah, I'm inclined to just pull this to the list for the moment and see if we can get any further. I'm also thinking that maybe bringing the working group chairs list into this and saying, you know, how can we formulate this that will best help you, and see if we can get some of those folks to say, no, just updating 7221 would be best. No, putting it on a website would be best. And that might inform our dispatch question.
Right. So just to highlight that, we are okay, or we are more than okay. We are discussion with for this working group.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've stayed in the lines in this discussion of not trying to dive into the actual content of the document. We're talking about, for something like this, what is the right path forward? And I don't think it's an unreasonable discussion. I think yes, it's a little bogged down, but I think this would have come up with any other process discussion which has this kind of, is it normative, is it just informative, and how do we express that kind of question? So I think it's worth, and Braun gives a +1 to that, going to working group chairs and say, look, we're trying to figure out how to move this forward. And if you find 7221 useful or not useful, it would be good to figure out what you think the next step should be, and have those people contribute to the list. But I don't think we're making any more progress in here at this point. Does anybody object to that being the summary at this moment?
Okay, so we have 50 minutes left. We can continue to any other business if there is any. I don't feel like we are progressing a lot at this point.
Anybody else got other things they wanted to bring up, or at least want to introduce such that we can start discussing them on the list? I love the sound of crickets at night. It's a fine thing. It's only, 40 midnight plus 45 here, so. All right. Oh, Lorenzo wants to jump in. Go right ahead. Yes, sir. Your mic is on.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just to add to the surreality of this session, we actually had a draft that we wanted to take to int area, and it got cut out due to lack of agenda time. So
No.
All right.
Sorry. No technical documents in this working group. I know that's out of scope.
No. The question is where should it go? Actually, we actually did debate whether it should be taken here or not.
It's a process document.
I mean, it's kind of a vague document. So yeah. So it would be useful to get this group's opinion on whether it should go and where it should go. But it's not on the agenda. So
Well, I mean, give us a pointer to a document, and you could bring it up on the list.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I'll send it to. Yeah, I should have we should have asked this for agenda time. I didn't. I dropped the ball. So I'll send it to the list. And
okay.
Yeah.
Or even if you would paste the URL into the Jabber room, I'll put it in the minutes so that people go to look at it.
Yep, I will do that. Yes.
Thank you. And I'll mute Lorenzo's typing, and if anybody else wants to make a comment. Miria?
Sorry, I should have joined the queue first.
I may have accidentally muted you while clicking around, Miria. Sorry about that.
Now I'm back.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Sorry.
and I should have joined the queue. Sorry, but anyway,
No
I'm
worries.
here. So as we did discuss that a couple of meetings ago, we updated our draft that proposes a new tag to replace the updates tag, and we still discuss this on the RC interest list, just as some information for this group.
Thank you, Miria. Okay. I don't see anybody jumping to the mic. Anybody else?
For better or for worse, I think that's true. Okay, but Francesca and I will try and formulate the question to the list in a little more sharp way, so that we at least can try and get an answer that looks reasonable. Because yeah.
And we will forward to the working group chairs mailing list.
Yep.
I am even thinking we should forward that to the ITF because, as many said, this is not
broader than just chairs. Yeah.
Yeah. We should reach everybody, but.
Yep. Which draft? Just checking the chat room. Alyssa, Lorenzo's draft is the one you were thinking that might need to go to
Yes.
architecture to discuss?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I mean, people are making other recommendations, but
yeah. No, I'm just making sure
broad.
that something didn't
It's
change
broad, but
with the topic of today. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not for
I've
gender.
collected 2 areas that I need to take this to so far. I'm waiting to be told that I need to take it to. I don't know how many there are.
We will take you to every working group in the place, Lorenzo. We can do it. All right. Yeah, well, Ecker suggests routing instead of security, of course, but all right. Very good. Well, appreciate everybody coming and playing along, and we'll get some minutes together. I've got to re-listen to some things and fill in the blanks. And feel free, CodeMD is out there if you would be so kind as to take a look at the things that Rich and I attributed to you and correct them if you feel need be. That would be much appreciated. But otherwise, we will try and get them updated and get the discussion going on the list.
And see you around in Gathertown. And thanks, Rich, for helping with the minutes as well.
Yes,
Bye-bye.
thank you very much, Rich. Bye, everyone.